Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I recall Charles Cipione, please?
Yes.
Lift your right hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please do take a seat, Mr. Cipione. As we established on the last occasion, your report is 174 pages in length and is divided into two parts, parts 1 and 2. Part 1 is between pages 12 and 64, and part 2 is between pages 65 and 160. You're giving evidence today, as you know, about part 2 of your report. Can you take open part 2 of your report, please? It is page 65 in a hard copy, and on the screen it's EXPG 601. Thank you. That runs, as I say, between pages 65 and 160. Can you please confirm the following? Firstly, that you've made clear in part 2 of your report which facts and matters referred to are within your own knowledge and which are not.
Yes.
Secondly, that those facts in part 2 of your report, which are within your own knowledge, you confirm to be true.
Yes.
And thirdly, that the opinions you've expressed in part 2 of your report represent your true and complete professional opinions on the matters to which they refer.
Yes.
Thank you. Can we turn to the next page, please, which is your methodology. In this section of your report, and over the next 6 pages, you address the methodology that you and your team adopted to analyse the primary material that you were provided with. Is that right?
That is correct.
Now, rather than going through each of the paragraphs on those 6 pages, I would be grateful if you would describe in summary terms the process that you and your team adopted to the very large cohort of material that you were given.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we'll take this section by section. The first section, 7.2, is the analytics work stream. And what I'm describing here is the fact that we wanted to try to structure the information in the peaks and pinnacles in a way that we could then do further analysis on that. Effectively, what we did was we took a number of HTML and PDF files and converted them into a more digitized form so that we could do searching and whatnot, and then feed it into further processes. So effectively, that's what 7.2 is describing.
So it's the very first stage, getting the primary material into a more readable and searchable format.
Exactly.
Yes, and after that analytics work stream, what was next?
So as part, as a further downstream process following the analytics work stream, we also wanted to incorporate a couple of technologies for the review purposes of the project. Two of those technologies, the two technologies are relativity and brain space. Relativity is a e-discovery platform for reviewing documents. So we wanted to populate the information into relativity, all of the peaks and pinnacles, as well as the KELs and monthly reports if we needed them in there for review purposes.
And just stopping there, just to remind us from last time, I think you received 56,489 pinnacles and 16,530 peaks. Does that sound right?
That sounds right, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I interrupted.
So relativity is just a tool to help for the review process, as simple as that. Brain space is a tool to help organize the searching methodologies that we were using for some of the work that we were doing. Effectively, it is a machine learning tool that allows us to group the information, especially as it came from the analytics work section, to help us narrow in and identify specific documents or groups of documents as needed throughout the review. So effectively, we loaded the information into there, into relativity and into brain space as part of the process. So we actually loaded in the HTML documents, but we associated them with the work that was performed in the analytics work stream. So they were paired up.
Tied
so to
with each
speak.
other.
Exactly. Perhaps it might be interesting, some of the information that we were interested in seeing, especially in the peaks and the pinnacles, were bits of information out of the peaks and pinnacles, referred to as response categories and defect causes. They were just a standard bit of information that were in the peaks and pinnacles. So we did, I do reference where we had our reference information from there. And if you look on figure 7.1, it shows how that would have been displayed in the relativity system as the team was looking through their initial review to identify documents for me to review.
Thank you. I think you also received 656 KELs, is that right?
That is correct. So we did a similar process with the KELs. We ran it through the analytics work stream, and we made that information available in relativity and brain space for review purposes.
Now, I think you were only able to examine a proportion of the KELs that you identified in the period that you were looking at. And the reason for that was that you were, I think, told that some KELs had been deleted. Do you know why the KELs had been deleted?
Let me make sure.
It's a foot at 69, 744, 745.
Yes, my understanding was some of the KELs were deleted and weren't available for me to receive for review.
Did you, from the material that you did examine, understand why the KELs may have been deleted or not?
Other than they were deleted, they could have timed out. Perhaps they weren't relevant for retention from Fujitsu, but past that, it would be speculation on my part.
Thank you very much. You received a series of management reports, I think too, and you gave us the numbers of those on the last occasion and the different species of the management reports, monthly pathway ICL reports and the like. They're set out in the previous section of your report in 6.4. I'm not going to go there. You explained overall on the last occasion that what you described as a brute force approach was not possible. Can you just remind us of what you meant by a brute force approach not being possible?
Right, so the brute force approach was not a practical approach to review the peaks and the pinnacles.
Yes.
However, for the management reports, I did review those.
Yes.
I reviewed all of those.
Yes.
So the review process for the management reports was, I read them. I read all of them, sometimes several times. For the peaks and the pinnacles, it was more of the relativity review process, and we can get into that a little bit more if you want, as far as, we would target particular words. We would have brain space help us identify themes that we were interested in looking in, and have brain space assist us in identifying the peaks or pinnacles that were relevant to the particular theme that we were investigating. So peaks and pinnacles, brute force, too many documents, not enough time, and we did not do that. For the monthly reports and the KELs, we did review all of those.
Thank you very much. In terms of the limitations of the exercise that you undertook. You took us through on the last occasion the limitations of it, just to remind us of some of them. Firstly, the material that you were examining came principally from Fujitsu rather than the post office.
That is correct.
And therefore, you don't have, as it were, the post office side of the house, the side of the story, insofar as concerns the issues that you speak to in your report.
That is correct. There are a few of the monthly reports
Yes.
that were jointly issued by the post office and by ICL Pathway, but the majority of the information that was used for the themes and opinions I arrive at comes solely from Fujitsu or from ICL Pathway.
And on occasions, the ICL Pathway issued monthly reports attribute a view to the post office, but that's coming from ICL Pathway rather than the post office itself.
That is correct. To the extent that I cite anything that refers to the post office, unless it's from the joint report, that is ICL Pathway's view concerning the post office. It is not the post office's view.
We'll come to look at an example of the joint report where it's co-authored by the post office and Fujitsu in a moment. And secondly, in terms of the limitation of the time period of the exercise you were undertaking, it restricted to which years?
I believe it was 1996 through 2000 was the material. The material was covering that time period.
Now, I believe you have been given access to the witness statements of the witnesses who have to date given evidence in phase 2 of the inquiry.
That is correct.
And you have been given access to the transcripts of witnesses who have to date given evidence in phase 2 of the inquiry.
Yes.
Has anything in the witness statements that you've been given or the transcripts that you've been able to read given you cause to revise or change any of the opinions or the contents of your report in part 2?
I have not read anything in the witness statements or the transcripts that gives me pause concerning any of my opinions.
Before we get into the detail, and we're going to come back to this at the end, when looking at some of your overall conclusions that are expressed in the executive summary, at a high level, could you summarize for us the impact, if any, that the written and oral evidence that you have been able to read had on the views expressed in your report? That's a very broad question.
Yeah. Could you ask me the question one more time, please?
Yeah. Looking at the witness evidence that you have read, both the witness statements and the transcripts, can you summarize for us what impact, if any, that evidence had on the views expressed in your report?
As far as the views expressed in my report, I believe it confirms most of the views that I've expressed in my report. The witness statements and the transcript information that I've read so far seems to run in parallel with the opinions that I've expressed here.
So would this be a fair way of putting it? It solidified the conclusions that you reached?
Yes.
In the light of the witness statements and transcripts of the oral evidence that you've read, have you formed any view as to what you now know as to the use of some of the data that the Horizon system produced for criminal justice purposes, i.e. to seek to prove beyond reasonable doubt that a sub-postmaster committed an offence of theft or false accounting?
Are you asking me if I have an opinion on whether there was a high level of integrity within the data that was used?
Yes.
Yes. Based off of the information in the witness statements and the transcripts, I think that the integrity of the information used would be suspect.
You told us on the last occasion that part of your background a significant part of it involved the design, creation, and maintenance of systems that are used in legal proceedings.
That is correct.
Can you just remind us in summary form what that was,
Yes, so
or that is, I think?
what that is, so the firm I work for, Alex Partners, does a lot of work in the turnaround and restructuring space in the United States. As that is a legal proceeding that requires a lot of reporting to the court, and it requires basically presenting defensible data as far as the court is concerned. And when I say defensible, what I mean is the data has to be complete and accurate. And to support that completeness and accuracy, it's important for the people producing the data and any analyses or reports that are associated with that data to maintain a high level of transparency and auditability within those data sets.
What do you mean by a high level of transparency and auditability?
So what I mean is it's apparent what happened with the data. And you can look at that two ways. When I say transparency, I mean you're talking about all the processes, all of the manipulations. It's apparent through the coding or the queries or the reporting exactly what manipulations are happening there.
And transparent to who?
Transparent to anyone that wants to look at it. Transparent for the court, transparent for the debtors, transparent for the creditors, which are the two sides in the bankruptcy court in the United States.
How does the design of a system that produces data that may be used for the purposes of legal proceedings, including criminal legal proceedings, affect the design of the system?
I'm going to go back to the concepts of the results have to be complete and accurate. And that's kind of lifted from the accounting world, completeness and accuracy. Accuracy you can think of as at the very atomic level of everything is correct. Everything is correct. Completeness means it's correct for everything. So you want to, so for instance, if you have a set of transactions and you are trying to display perhaps a subset of them and do a manipulation, do some sort of calculation and then summary information on that. What you want to be able to prove is, number one, I've started with the complete set of data. The way you do that is you show perhaps not all of the data is used in the final analysis, but you show that there's basically a waterfall of here's the data here's everything, here's the set of data that is being used in the analysis, and here's the set of data that is not being used in the analysis. A completeness check on that would be the set that's not used in the analysis adds up to 100 pounds. The set that is being used in the analysis is 110 pounds. And I can go back and confirm that, showing that the complete set is 110 pounds worth of data. So that would be just a very simple view of completeness. Accuracy would be perhaps I'm calculating an interest rate on some of the transactions, and I want to show that basically there's a manipulation of that. So perhaps I'm doing a time series, and over time interest accrues to a particular amount. I want to be able to show that that calculation is accurate. So I want to show that it's accurate at the detail level, and I want to show that it's complete at the very highest level, so that there's no doubt that the results of the reports that I'm doing are complete and accurate. I can say that they're complete and accurate, and you can either believe me or not believe me. But if I have a system or a process that is both transparent and auditable, it allows anyone that wants to look at it to confirm for themselves that, okay, I'm looking at the process that happened, and for purposes of transparency, that might be looking at the code that I used to do all the manipulations. Alternatively, If it's like a multi-step process and you want to see the waterfall going from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 and what the results are for the complete set of data, having all of that recorded from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4 and available for review, that would be an auditability check. So if I have one of them, it probably would provide comfort to everyone. If I have both of them, it just increases the comfort, not only for them, but for me, because I want to be able to make sure as I'm doing the process that I'm doing it correctly. I want to make sure that there is a great amount of integrity in the results that I produce, especially if it's in a commercial court or a business litigation court. I would expect that level of custodianship is probably even more important in a criminal court.
And so does it come to this, that the answer to my question is that, yes, it does affect, and it affects in the way that you've described, the way that you design, build, and run a system, if you know that the data from it may be used for the purposes of legal proceedings?
I would say it would affect it regardless of what system I'm using, but as the stakes go up, yes, it's even more important to adhere to those principles.
Thank you. Can we turn to the topics that you have addressed in your report? And they start on page 72. And there are a series of topics, and we're going to go through them one by one, that you have identified as being relevant and important.
Yes.
The first of them is disclosed by the heading, Sub-Postmaster Training Experienced Difficulties during National Rollout. In paragraph 8.1.1, you address the importance of training. Can you help us at a general level, without addressing the Horizon IT system for the moment, how important is training when a new IT system is introduced?
Of course, it's very important for the users of the system to know how to use the system. The system is there for the users. The system there is there to support the business processes that have been part of the requirements process for building the system. System could be great, but if the users don't know how to use it, it loses all its value. So it's critically important that the users be very comfortable with operating the system.
In the case of the Horizon system, was there anything in particular that heightened the need for such training?
I would say generally, my statement is a blanket statement. Users need to know how to use the system. I believe that there might be certain circumstances in the user community for the Horizon system that probably heighten the attention that might need to be spent on making sure that this user community is attended to properly. The first one is, my understanding is that prior to the Horizon system, this was a manual process. So not only are you doing a change of process, you are also introducing the concept of technology to assist in the process. So anytime you change, that's troubling, or that could be a challenge for some people. But going from a very paper-based process to a computer-based process just adds another dimension of unknown to the formula, and it must be accounted for.
And this was happening at the close of the last century.
Yes. Even the last millennium.
Yes. You highlight in the last sentence of paragraph 8.1.1, it's apparent from reading the ICL monthly reports that there were significant problems in training the SPMs as they adopted the Horizon IT system. on the basis of what you read, looking at it generally, is it fair to say that was a consistent theme throughout the period that we're looking at?
Yes,
And that was recorded in the ICL reports at a significant level of concern.
yes.
In paragraph 8.1.2, you make the point that this was not just a challenge of training users on a new system, it was actually a challenge of training users on computers in general. Is that a product of the age that we're talking about?
Absolutely.
And you extract a quotation from, I think, material published by Fujitsu as part of its promotional and sales literature. And in the last 5 lines of it, of the quotation from their promotional material, you say, or they say, training was provided to 63,000 staff members from the ages of 16 to 87 with various skills. Approximately 5,000 calls were received each week by the help desk due to the counter staff's lack of computer experience. Is it upon that basis that you make the point that the group of people that were being trained naturally had a variable level of skills?
Yes,
5,000 calls a week with a cohort of 63,000. Did you draw any views on that?
that's a high rate for sure. I think it's a function of, like I said, not only are we changing the system from paper-based to computer, but we do have a wide spectrum of what I would expect to be. Some people are very computer savvy at that point, but there might be some people that have moderate abilities in computers. Might be some people that don't have any ability to use computers, and there might be some people that are very resistant or just don't want to use computers. So that's a wide range of users to try to accommodate, and I would expect that probably was part of the calculus that went into those numbers.
You tell us in paragraph 8.1.3 that Pathway was aware of the importance of training the sub-postmasters and that was recognised by them early on. And you note that Pathway itself noted in April 1999 that the sub-postmasters were facing difficulties in transitioning from a paper-based balancing process to an automated balancing process. And that ICL Pathway responded by saying that a greater emphasis should be placed in training on the practical experience of balancing. That was the answer that was given at the time, is that right?
Yes.
Did it appear that that was successful, i.e. the answer from ICL saying a greater emphasis must be placed on practical experience of balancing, given the reports of difficulties in balancing persisted throughout 1999?
I apologize, Mr. Beer. What was the actual question?
Yeah. Did it appear to you that the response to the problems that sub-postmasters reported of facing difficulties in balancing, namely to say, well, a greater emphasis must be placed on training, on practical experience of balancing, was successful given the reports of difficulties in balancing persisted throughout 1999?
I would say that it didn't appear to alleviate the problems.
Can we look at some examples over the page, please, in the extracts from the management reports, including ICL Pathway's monthly report? In fact, just before we do so, can I look at what you said in paragraph 8.1.4 at the foot of the previous page? You tell us in the last few sentences that what we're about to look at are verbatim extracts that you have highlighted some matters in bold, that the views expressed are those of the authors, being principally ICL pathway documents, but in some cases joint ICL and post office documents.
That is correct.
And if we then go over the page, please, do you, in the second column of this table, make clear whether this is an ICL document that you are quoting verbatim from, or a jointly issued document from ICL Pathway and the Post Office?
Yes, it's clear. So, for instance, the first line, ICL Pathway Monthly Report, April 1999, that's an ICL Pathway authored, a solely ICL Pathway authored document.
And the rest of that page, I think, is all the same.
That's correct.
And then if we just skip over the page
Yes.
and look at the first entry,
Yes, the first entry there, ICL and Post Office Monthly Joint Implementation Report. So that would have been co-authored by ICL and the Post Office.
and then I think the rest of the documents on the page are ICL Pathway alone issued documents.
That's correct.
And I think we can see that in evidence, not only by your description of the report as being an ICL Pathway monthly report, but also from the extracted text. If you look at the second report from May, Pathway wrote, POCL are shaping up to hit us on service level agreements and training.
Yes, that would have been ICL Pathway's view.
And so the us there is the ICL Pathway view.
Yes.
Was there anything in the content of the reports that suggested where they were authored by ICL Pathway themselves, these monthly reports, that POCL were provided with copies of them?
I don't believe I ever saw any indication of that.
From the other evidence that you read, from Pinnacles, Peaks, Kells, or other documentation that you read, was there anything in that which suggested that those ICL Pathway monthly reports were provided to POCL?
No.
Now that formulation that we read at the end of paragraph 8.1.4, if we just go back to that, is the, at the foot of the page, thank you, is the same formulation, give or take a few words, that you use in succeeding sections of your report when you're about to introduce the table of verbatim extracts from Pinnacles, Peaks, Kells monthly reports?
Yes.
And does what you've just said apply equally to all of those succeeding sections?
It does.
Thank you. So go back to the substance then. If we can just briefly look at, over the page, please, at at September 99. Scroll down, please. The first entry. ICL records, although national rollout rates have risen to 2,000 post offices per week, the level of issues occurring on installation day and the level of training scheduling failures puts achievement of the 300 offices per week rollout rate required in 2000 at risk. Knowledge Pool are introducing new scheduling software and a plan of activity to reduce the causes of the other issues is being put in place for the November to January break in national rollout. Can you help us? Who were Knowledge Pool?
I believe Knowledge Pool was the partner with ICL that assisted with the training of the SPMs.
Okay, so essentially a subcontractor of ICL Pathway that provided the training.
Yes.
We can see that the second entry for September 1999, currently a serious issue relating to the scheduling of training events within the implementation program. The training schedule system of Pathways training subcontractor Knowledge Pool has been struggling to cope during the early part of national rollout, although a planned system replacement was imminent. So this isn't Horizon itself. This is a separate system used for scheduling training. Is
That's
that how you understood it?
Yes.
During September, the training scheduling system crashed, resulting in a loss of data and some data corruption. And then we can read the rest. And then if we go over the page, please. The joint report covering a period of September 99 to nearly the end of October 99, training continues to cause major difficulties. And then in May, the two lots of May 2000 entries, if you just cast your eye over those, please. So the first, POCL perception of SLAs and training, and also of our commercial attitude to risk-taking on new business, all negative, as epitomised by the recent Dave Miller letter. Risk remains that POCL will extract commercial concessions out of us. Did you track that through, the suggestion that POCL would seek money from ICL Pathway in relation to the provision of training?
When you say, did I track that through?
Yes, did you see that in later documents?
I believe that was a running commentary, yes.
We can see the entry then of December 2000, a settlement for the projected shortfall in training courses against the contracted number arising from low course occupancy levels has been agreed with the Post Office as part of a package to achieve relaxations against existing service level agreements. Pathway will pay the first £1 million of the training shortfall. That's what I was
Yes.
referring to. Did what you read in these reports, these management reports, reflect what you found in the pinnacles when you came to read them relating to training issues?
Yes.
And if we look at the foot of the page at 8.1.5, you start a verbatim or a summary of some of the pinnacles and include verbatim extracts from them. I'm not going to go through them, but you summarise them in 8.1.5, a review of the pinnacles and peaks. I think these are just pinnacles, in fact, reinforces the theme that the sub-postmasters were reporting that the lack of training was problematic in the execution of business activities. Additionally, SSC staff, remembering back, that's the third tier of support, were also raising concerns about the ineffectual nature of training, and you emboldened some sections. You then set out in paragraph 8.2 a series of pinnacles. As I say, I'm not going to go through them. Can we go forward to page 76, please? And look at 8.1.6, which is towards the bottom of the page. You say that you surveyed the pinnacle and peak population for any final defect cause being assigned general user or general user knowledge. Can you just explain what you mean by surveying the population for any final defect cause?
Certainly. So at the beginning of our conversation today, we talked about the analytics work stream and evaluating the peaks and the pinnacles information. And we, a part of that analytics work stream was to help identify certain data elements that were contained within the peaks and the pinnacles. One of those data elements was a defect cause, and a defect cause is essentially as an error was raised and entered into the peak or pinnacle system, it was evaluated. And part of that evaluation was to, the ICL pathway would make a determination on what the cause of the particular defect that raised that error was. This is a representation of that analysis. So looking through the population of peaks and pinnacles that we had in our possession, we looked for the final defect cause. So perhaps it might be good for me to talk about that.
Yes.
So the defect cause has the opportunity to change values as the error is being investigated. It might be thought that there might be a particular, an initial evaluation that a defect cause is one thing, but upon further investigation, it has the opportunity to change. So the analysis here is looking at what the final value of the defect cause was across the peak and pinnacle population. And I identified two values that I thought were pertinent for this section.
They are general-user and general-user knowledge.
Exactly.
And that resulted in the period you were looking at 435 pinnacles being identified where those two values have been applied.
That is correct.
You say, please keep in mind that the SMC was supposed to resolve user issues. These pinnacles and peaks were promoted to the SSC. What did you mean? What sits behind those two sentences?
Right. So we'll talk about that in greater detail, I'm sure, as the conversation continues. But the SSC, who is in charge of the peaks and pinnacles, that's more of a technical error evaluation and remediation system. User questions should have been identified by the help desk or by the SMC, which are the first and second levels of basically help to the users. Only real technical errors are supposed to arrive for the SSC to evaluate, but if it does get to the SSC, they raise a pinnacle and it starts to be documented. So what I'm trying to convey here is that this is what actually didn't get resolved at the first and second level. This population could be much greater if we went and looked back at the actual help desk tickets, because the help desk is what precedes anything that might get into the peak or pinnacle system.
The 5,000 calls a week.
Yes, exactly.
What's the significance of this finding in 8.1.6?
There are a lot of problems with user knowledge on how to use the system.
In 8.1.7, you say this figure indicates a wave of user issues in September 99, March 2000, June 2000, and November 2000 during the national rollout period. And if we go over the page, please. If we can blow that up slightly. You depict the overall volumes between, I think, May 99 and December 2000.
Yes.
And the spikes that you speak about, September 99, which we can see before, October 99, March 2000, June 2000, and November 2000. I suppose July as well. The color coding on the right-hand side, does that refer to the final defect cause?
Yes.
To the thing that you've just spoken about?
Exactly.
given the process or progress in national rollout, did you think about whether this is a function, these peaks, of the increasing number of users being admitted to the system?
It absolutely is part of the function, yes.
Did you draw any overall conclusions from what you saw in the monthly reports and the pinnacles as to the training difficulties that were experienced during national rollout?
Just the general concept that the training didn't seem to go swimmingly well. The user base had a lot of problems with understanding how to use the system, or throughout the national rollout period. That's the conclusion that I would draw.
Thank you. Can we turn to section 9, please, of your report on page 78? The heading hardware issues were problematic during national rollout. And if we read 9.1.2, in the national rollout of the Horizon IT system, there was a discrete period, August 99, where hardware issues rose to the level of being, quote, a serious acceptance incident. According to ICL Pathways monthly report, some issues persisted through October 1999, but appear to have subsided to an acceptable level by January 2000. Now, the material that you relied on to say that, I think, all came from the ICL Pathway monthly reports, which you set out in table 9.1, is that right?
Yes.
If we go forwards, please, to page 80, and read that very short paragraph at the top of the page, it should be noted that in May 2000, there were still hardware issues being raised in Pinnacles. And then if you then look at the table at 9.2, you're essentially checking what you read in the monthly report again against the Pinnacles. Is that right?
That is correct.
Now, despite what was said in the ICL Pathway monthly report about the issue subsiding to an acceptable level at the start of 2000, you record that in May 2000 there were still hardware issues being raised in Pinnacles. Is that right?
That is correct.
Did you conduct a survey of Pinnacles and peaks between July 1996 and the end of 2000, where the product at fault in the Pinnacle or peak was shown as desktop or hardware?
Yes.
And if we turn over the page to page 81, please. And just scroll down to 9.1.5 and the table underneath. Did you, using that product at fault value, find that there were 1,281 Pinnacles or peaks that had that value ascribed to them as the final fault?
Yes.
And did you set those out in your table between the period I mentioned, July 96 and end 2000 at 9.1?
Yes.
And does that show a spike during the national rollout period?
Yes, it does.
Again, that might be a function of the fact that there were more users being brought online.
Absolutely.
If we look at 9.1.6, you say you again surveyed the Pinnacles and peaks for product groups listed in the next figures legend, where the product at fault value was hardware, ISDN adapter or driver. So just explain again what you're doing there.
So there's a value within the information that I received called product at fault, and to the extent that it existed and we identified a value for that, what we did was we basically pulled out any product at fault values that were either hardware, ISDN, or ISDN adapter / driver, all of which I would associate with a hardware issue.
And do we see, if we go over the page in 9.2, a similar pattern of a peak during national rollout
Yes.
in table 9.2?
Sorry. Yes.
In 9.1.7, you tell us that you looked at 332 KELs, of which about 10% were coded as responsive, i.e. the nature of the KEL was concerned with a hardware-related issue.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Looking at all of those sources, the monthly reports, the pinnacles and peaks, and the KELs, did you form any view as to the overall, as to the preponderance of hardware issues during national rollout?
The hardware issue, first of all, there absolutely was an issue with hardware during national rollout, and it impeded the rollout, certainly.
Could such issues affect the reliability of data held on the system, and could they, such reliability issues lead to what would seem to be inexplicable financial imbalances?
That would, yes, there's a possibility that that could happen, absolutely.
Is it normal that there are hardware issues when you roll out a big system?
Yes, and we need to remember the time range that we're talking about. I would say over the last 25 years, the reliability of hardware used in technical systems has improved drastically. It wasn't as good. It certainly wasn't, the hardware wasn't as good in the late 90s as it is now as far as reliability and durability is concerned. So I am extremely aware of that. Notwithstanding that statement, that probably was little comfort to anyone that was experiencing the hardware issues during that time, and it definitely posed a problem for the national rollout.
Can anything be done to warn or inform end users, sub-postmasters, of the issues that might be caused by hardware problems? So hardware-generated keystrokes, for example, or phantom transactions?
Yes. So to the extent that ICL Pathway was aware of such a specific thing as that, definitely communications could have been made. I suspect that was a small fraction of what I'm showing here. I think what I'm showing here is more of a catastrophic, holistic failure of either the communication, the ISDN line, or the counter setup. It could be that both your hard drives failed. You know, unfortunately, that's just things that happened during that time. I mean, hard drives could fail right now, certainly also, but the prevalence of that was much greater 25 years ago.
So overall, I think you've told us that you form the view that hardware issues caused problems for sub-postmasters, and it was problematic for them during the national rollout.
Absolutely.
Can we turn to section 10, please, page 83, where you address the disconnection of many post office branches from the central system during national rollout. You tell us that in 10.1.1 that the ambition of Horizon was to allow branches to communicate their information to a central system, reminding us of an earlier passage in your report, the Horizon campuses. It also allowed for software and reference data updates to be distributed from the campuses to the branches. To accomplish this, a telecommunications system was incorporated into Horizon. This depended on ISDN lines or satellite links being installed at each branch, with BT and Energis providing the backbone infrastructure to utilise the hardware. It relied also on each branch's equipment to be available for polling. Can you tell us what polling means, please?
Certainly. It's basically having a remote computer being available to communicate with a central computer. And the polling is usually described as when the central computer reaches out to the remote computer to see if it's available to communicate. So that would be polling.
And how does that work? Can you explain in a little more detail how that works?
Certainly. So in this system, the network was not always on. It was not like systems are now when you're, well, even when you're on your browser, you're not really actually always on necessarily. But effectively, the mechanism that they were using was they had a communications link either through satellite or through an ISDN line that utilized BT or Energis's backbone or the other service providers, which allowed the movement of data between the counter information at the branch and the data servers at Boodle or Wigan. And what would happen is every night that the counters needed to basically communicate with the central branch to accumulate all the transactions that happened, right? So that would be the direction of I've conducted my business, and I want to make sure that all of the records of those transactions are managed centrally at the data centers. So in order to accomplish that, the data center and the counter needs to communicate. Since it's not a persistent connected communications link, what would happen is a polling would have to occur. The central system would need to reach out to each one of the counters and say, number one, are you even there? And if you are there, I need to grab some information from you. I need basically to collect all the transactions that you performed that day so that I can do the downstream processing of all that information. So effectively, that's what the polling information is. There are occasions also where the central system needs to push information down to the counters. That might be I'm updating reference data, which is, if you remember, it's part of the system that allows the system to work correctly, and in order to maintain synchronization of how each system works, all of that information needs to be passed down to the counters, as well as just straight software updates that would need to be passed down to the counters.
You tell us in 10.1.3 that the monthly reports indicate that throughout 98 and 99, Pathway was concerned with their ability to effectuate this design feature. They were concerned with BT's coverage of the UK, as well as other technical issues related to their standards. So is that concern by ICEL Pathway before national rollout?
Yes.
This is even before national rollout. And then if we look at 10.1.4, during the national rollout, these problems were realised. So true enough, ICL pathways worries turned out to be correct.
Yes.
Hardware, networkability, and user issues combined to create a situation where ICL pathway was occupied with a higher than expected amount of non-polling branches. Given what you said, that there was concern before national rollout about ICL pathways' ability to effectuate this design feature, i.e. to ensure polling with hardware installed at the branch, what do you mean by it was higher than expected amount of non-polling branches?
I would imagine in any contingency planning that anyone was doing with a system that was designed like this, that they would expect that some counters wouldn't be available for some periods of time. But based off of the reading that I performed, it was much higher than they expected as far as non-polled counters.
You say in the third sentence this was problematic because Horizon relied on this design aspect to not only collate and centralize information, but also for efficient updates of software to the branches. So at what level of problem is this?
It's a giant level of problem. Let's take it to an extreme. Let's say that I never am able to poll a particular counter. Well, effectively, that counter is out of the network. So if I am not able to communicate between the counter and the data centers, that's breaking the system. That's taking all of the functionality that was purported to be in the Horizon system and throwing it out on a counter-by-counter basis.
For bug fixes, did that rely on the ability to poll?
Yes. Any communication between the central servers and the counters relied on that communication mechanism, which is I'm referring to as the polling. Or the polling is actually just, are you there? Once you get an affirmative answer back, then you can move information between either the counter and the data center or the data center and the counter.
You say in 10.1.5, additionally, ICL Pathway was compelled to raise and resolve an issue for any branch whose non-polled status was 24 hours in duration.
Yes.
Just explain what that means.
So I believe this is related to an SLA requirement for ICL Pathway. This just as part of the requirements process, they needed to make sure that they were polling different counters, and that's regardless of why. There could be things that were completely out of ICL Pathway's control that would stop that polling from happening, such as the counter wasn't turned on. If that counter computer is never on, it's never going to be polled. And unless ICL Pathway sends someone out to turn it on, it's never going to be turned on. So there were definitely some aspects of that were outside of their immediate control.
You set out extracts from the monthly reports that essentially establish what you've said in your last few answers. Can we go on to page 86, please? And look at the table 10.2, please. Can you explain what this table shows, please?
Certainly. So this table is describing all of the days in the month of November of 2000, and it is creating a set of categories of how many counters or how many offices weren't able to be polled across a different span, a different set of days. So for instance, we see the first figure of 86. On November 1 of 2000, there were 86 counters that had not been polled in a day.
And you use language interchangeably of counters and branches or counters and offices. Is it
yes.
counters or is it offices?
This says offices, so,
Yeah, okay.
so maybe we should also refresh our memory on exactly how the Horizon system worked at that time. So there might have been many particular counters at each office, but there was only one counter that was hooked up to the communication system that allowed for polling. So this would be office, not necessarily counter. This would be per branch or per office.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You were telling us that for the 1st of November, there were 86 offices that did not poll for one day.
Exactly.
There were 83 that hadn't polled for 2 or 3 days.
Yes.
There were 28 that hadn't polled for between 4 and 9 days.
Yes.
And so it goes on.
Exactly.
Did you draw a conclusion from this level or extent of non-polling offices and the duration?
This was an issue, especially as we look further into November. You see the numbers becoming very high there. So even if there were 20,000 offices, 20,000 branches. Let's pretend that there's 20,000 branches live in the network. That's a significant, towards the end of November, that's a significant portion of those branches that are not communicating with the central data servers.
Does this show a consistently serious problem across the entire month, essentially?
Yes.
You then again cross-refer to what the monthly reports had shown to the pinnacles and peaks. Is that right?
Yes.
And if we look, please, at the foot of 87, page 87, at 10.1.8, you say, I surveyed the pinnacle and peak population for entries where the product at fault contained ISDN or VPN within their values. That's because they're both related to connectivity. This query resulted in the 4,733 entries shown in the figure below, with their specific product at fault values shown in the legend. This problem manifested during the national rollout period. Then over the page, please, to the graph. The colours on the right-hand side, or the key on the right-hand side, I think shows that the preponderance of the problems related to the shade of blue that relates to ISDN. Is that right?
Yes.
The fourth colour down on the right-hand side.
Yes.
And again, 4,733 product at fault values with ISDN or VPN. Did you draw any conclusion as to the whether that signified anything about the size or severity of the problem?
It indicates that there's absolutely an issue that was related to the physical connection or the implementation of the Horizon package at this time.
Thank you. I'm going to skip over for the moment sections 11 and 12 of your report and go straight to section 13, please, on page 98. Where your heading of the issue is the persistence of reference data management degraded the integrity of Horizon. Can you explain, before we get into the detail of this, what your overall finding was?
My overall finding was, so just to remind everyone, the reference data is is a component of the system that I referred to at my first hearing as data-driven logic. It could represent something as simple as just a price list, a first-class stamp costs this much. That information was not hard-coded into the Horizon system. It was passed to the Horizon system via what I'm referring to as reference data. Now, there were a lot more, my understanding is there were a lot more complicated partitions of the reference data that I won't go into now. But it was essential for the Horizon system to operate correctly, for that to have integrity and to be consistently, completely and accurately delivered to each one of the branches in order for the Horizon system to operate. What I'm saying here is there were a lot of issues that I read about that were referring to the integrity of the reference data as it pertained to the actual operation of the Horizon system.
I think you, on the last occasion, you identified, or you told us that a design of a system that utilized data-driven logic was in principle a good thing.
Absolutely.
You say in 13.1.3, the advantages of data-driven logic rely upon its custodianship. If the data in the data-driven logic is not timely, accurate, or complete, the system it supports will not operate it as intended. I think that speaks for itself.
Yes.
You then, in 1.4 and 1.5, set out issues raised by our ICL pathway as early as early 1997 concerning POCL's reference data incorporation into the system. You say by late 97, ICL pathway characterized its contractual obligations regarding reference data as poorly defined, but acknowledged the significance of the issue as crucial. What do you mean by that?
So if this is a vital component of your system, you have to make sure that it's right. What I've read in the materials that were provided to me was that this was a split responsibility between ICL Pathway and the Post Office Counters Limited. Ultimately, a lot of the information needed to be sourced from POCL. I don't think all of it, but a lot of it was sourced from POCL. What I'm trying to say here is that I don't know that the communication of requirements or the I believe that what ICL Pathway is saying here is they don't think that the post office is understanding the importance of this issue as ICL Pathway is trying to develop and deliver a system.
Thank you. You say in 1.6 that you are going to extract from the monthly reports the data that supports what you have just said. And then if we go over the page, please, to the foot of the page, you would keep going, please. Yes, sorry, it's 2 more pages to 102. And then foot of the page, please. In 13.1.7, you say a review of the pinnacles and peaks supports the contention that reference data was a cause of problems in the Horizon IT system. You set those out in your table at 13.2. We go over the page, please. And then over the page again. to page 105. You say that you surveyed the pinnacle and peak population for any product at fault value where reference data was indicated. You found 1,863 such pinnacles or peaks. And that led you to the conclusion that reference data problems began manifesting themselves in 1998 and were prevalent during the national rollout period. Can you just identify for us in the table? Thank you. It's the dark blue, second from bottom. Is that right?
Yes, so the dark blue, second from the bottom, says reference data explicitly, yes.
But the other product at fault values identified on that table are other product at fault values that also, in your view, relate to reference data.
Yes,
And I think they show a persistence of the issue right until the end of 2000, is that right?
that is correct.
How serious or problematic is this?
This is a big problem. This is a main component of the system. If the reference data.
Sorry, I missed that. This is
This is a big problem.
Yes.
This is a serious problem. If this is not done correctly, the system is not working correctly.
going back to 13.1.8. You say, interestingly, I suppose that's a relative value. Interestingly, product at fault value of POCL reference data seemed to appear in February 2000, and from that period forward, occupies a significant portion of the chart. Without teasing you too much, why did you find it interesting?
I found it interesting that I believe ICL Pathway was trying to clearly delineate whether they thought this reference data issue was a post office issue or not a post office issue.
I see. So they're being more precise as to the attribution of where they believe the reference data issue arises from and attributing that to POCL.
That is the conclusion I've drawn, yes.
Is that the sky blue colour in the chart at 13.1?
Yes,
That's why we don't see it before, because it's a new product at fault value.
that's right. Hypothetically, before that, it was still could have been caused by POCL, but they weren't tracking it at that level of precision, as you say.
That brings us to the end of section 13 of your report. So might that be an appropriate time to take the morning break?
Yes, sir.
So we lost you at the end of your sentence there.
I muted myself too quickly. I said that's fine, Mr. Beer.
Thank you very much, sir. Can we say past, please?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cipione, can I just go back before we move on to section 14 to something that you said in section 13 of your report? And if we just go back to 13.1.1 on page 98. You say in 13.1.1, this design feature, that's data-driven logic, its benefit was efficiently to update the Horizon IT system's functionality without the need to develop, design, test, and deploy new versions of the software. I think you're saying that as a positive thing there.
Absolutely, yes.
Would you accept that the use of reference data in this way whilst it lowered the need for development, design, testing and deployment of new versions of the software, in practice it may have led to a need for increased testing.
If the integrity of the reference data or the mechanism for distributing the reference data wasn't good, it could absolutely create a situation where there were a lot of errors in the system, and it might not be readily apparent where those errors were arising from. So that, in effect, could cause more testing, more cycling, more uncertainty around the causes and remediation efforts required to make the system work properly. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it does. Can we turn to section 14 of your report, please? Page 106. And your subject heading is the Horizon IT System Help Desk was often the root of service level agreement issues with POCL. Again, can you just explain in overview what this section of your report is concerned with?
This section is concerned with the frontline support that was provided to the sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses at the branches that were using the Horizon system. There was one of the service level agreements, or probably many of the metrics in the service level agreements required ICL pathway to have a help desk that was responsive when calls came in, and that's what I'm referring to here.
And here you're referring to the HSH, Horizon System Help Desk. That's the first line of support.
That is the first line of support.
You say that in the third line of 14.1.1, the monthly reports discuss the failings of the HSH in regard to SLA failings for a significant amount of the review period. Concerns were first raised in September 98 and carried through the national rollout. On your review of the material, did those concerns persist at the same level throughout that period?
They were a consistent topic of discussion in the material I read throughout the period.
You say the same issues that triggered SLA concerns also dented confidence from POCL. Where did you get that information from?
The monthly reports.
And so is that ICL saying that those issues dented POCL's confidence, so their perception of POCL's confidence in them?
Yes, those are ICL's words.
In May 2000, ICL declared an own goal. I think that's the word in the report itself, or words in the report itself. Is that right?
That is correct.
Based on Horizon System Help Desk performance, they replaced their management team and improvements were noted in June 2000.
Yes.
You then set out in your table at 14.1 on that page and the next extracts from the monthly reports that substantiate the conclusions that you had reached. And then at the foot of the next page, you tell us that you didn't examine the pinnacles and peaks to substantiate or undermine what was said in the monthly reports. Just explain why.
I wouldn't expect any discussion of frontline SLA response rates to exist within the Pinnacle or Peak documents.
Can we turn to section 15 of your report, please? Page 108. Where your conclusion is essentially in the section heading, the Horizon SMC was frequently cited for not properly filtering calls to the SSC. This lack of filtering delayed the SSC from resolving technical problems. So you're here addressing the second to the third level support lines, is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
You remind us in 15.1.1 of the error escalation process where users were directed to level 1, the HSH first. The SMC at level 2 was responsible for determining if the problem required the SSC to become involved. If the issue was deemed necessary for escalation, it would then be recorded in the Pinnacle system. The SSC was responsible for the maintenance of Pinnacles. What's the importance of a tiered escalation process such as this?
It would create a very efficient process to handle any issue that was raised by anyone using the Horizon system. The efficiency I'm referring to here relates to a user is having a problem. That problem could be that the user doesn't know how to use the system or something very simple, in which case it would be good to have at the first period of triage someone there that could help with very simple answers to the user community. That would have been the HSH, which was the first line. But it's not efficient as far as a help desk management process for the HSH to have a global understanding of every issue that might or might not come up. So they need to have someone to refer to if they're, because usually the first line of help desk is usually provided with a number of scripts that allow them to diagnose information that was received by the callers and either help the caller immediately, or at some point at the end of the script, it's okay, I don't know enough about the system right now, I need to pass you on to the next level. The SMC is the next level, who theoretically are a little bit more knowledgeable about some of the technical issues of the system, as well as the just general usability of the system. It's their responsibility to make sure that calls that get beyond the initial help desk are routed correctly. So if you recall in my first testimony, the SSC is not really in charge of any hardware issues. So if a call gets to the SMC and it's clear to the SMC that this is a hardware issue, I believe that there was a different group that helped the hardware issue. So perhaps the front line would not know exactly where to send that, but the SMC would. The SMC was supposed to only send calls on to the SSC if they were a non-hardware issue technically related to the Horizon system. So that was their purpose, and that is generally a good construction of a help desk process.
What did you see in the monthly reports when the topic of the SMC filtering calls was discussed? When I did read about the SMC in the monthly reports, it was usually in regard to the SMC was sending calls to the SSC that they should have been able to handle, or the help desk should have been able to handle, or certainly was not the responsibility of the third line of support, the SSC, the technical portion of the help desk. And what are the consequences of that?
Well, the consequences of that are now you have a group of people at the SSC, that's the third line, who are responsible for resolving actual technical issues of the Horizon system. That's a difficult job for multiple reasons. The situation that is created when the SMC is not filtering calls correctly is now they are having to deal with not only technical issue calls, but non-technical issue calls, but they don't know that necessarily when they're getting it. If the SMC promotes an issue to the SSC, they think it's a technical issue, so they start investigating it and probably spend a good amount of time on it. If they find out that this was something that should have been handled by the first or second line of support, their attention has been diverted from actual technical issues to non-technical issues that should have been resolved prior to it getting to the SSC.
And I think you tell us in 15.1.4 that problem persisted throughout the national rollout.
Yes.
You also, if we go to page 110, please, examined the bottom half of the page, extracts from Pinnacles. The heading to that table says verbatim extracts from monthly reports. I think that should be from Pinnacles and Peaks.
Yes.
To see whether that, which you'd read in the monthly reports, was supported, and I think you found that it was.
It is.
And we can see some of the things which I suppose the SSC were writing, emboldened. The first entry, 27th of May 99, why was the call sent to the SSC? 17th of June 99, I'm unsure why this was sent to the SSC. 13th of October 99, I don't understand why this call has been sent to the SSC. And so it goes on right up until December 2000.
Yes.
So despite, I think, the issue having been recognised, it persisted. Is that right?
That is correct.
Can we turn, please, to section 16 of your report? The SSC was overwhelmed with Pinnacles and Peaks, but was earnest in its effort to perform its duties. Is this related to section 15 that we've just looked at?
Yes. Yes, this is the third line. We discussed them a little bit in the prior section.
In terms of the SSC being overwhelmed with Pinnacles, is it, was that related to the SMC failing properly to filter calls up?
That was an aggravating condition.
What were the other causes of the SSC being overwhelmed with Pinnacles and Peaks?
There were a lot of errors being raised about the Horizon system.
You record in 16.1.2 the ICL monthly reports often call attention to the workload of the SSC. You reviewed the Pinnacles and Peaks and recognised the complexity of some of the issues that the SSC was responsible for resolving. What did you mean by that? You recognised the complexity?
In the course of doing my review, of course, I looked at quite a few of the Pinnacles and Peaks, and I needed to gain an understanding of, as best I could, of the issues that were being raised, meaning that there was a pinnacle or peak created, and the remediation process that was performed to attempt to remediate these errors as they arose. In the course of that review, I had to basically dive as deeply as I could into understanding many of these peaks or pinnacles. Through the course of that reading, it became clear to me that some of these issues were difficult to identify what the cause was, and therefore reading the narratives, I just wanted to comment that it was it was a good effort on the people, on the pinnacles and peaks that I read, for the people that, for the most part. Now, this is not a blanket statement, but this is a statement for the ones that I reviewed. For the most part, the review process that I observed through reading the narratives of the pinnacles and peaks appeared to be a very earnest effort to try to resolve the issues.
And what are the parameters of that view in terms of when and or for what period?
Are you talking what was the period of documentation that?
No, the view that there was an earnest attempt to resolve problems by the SSE.
So my parameters were, was attention being given to it? Did it seem to have been evolving? What was extra information needed? Was it provided? What was done with that information? And, was there some sort of resolution at whatever level achieved in those pinnacles and peaks?
It's my fault that you just answered what values did you use. My question was over what time period does that conclusion relate to?
Yes, so the information that I was looking at was from 1996 through 2000.
So the entire period?
Yes.
You extract from us in 16.1.4 and the table at 16.1 parts of the monthly reports that support those conclusions. And then if we go over the page, please, to 16.1.5 on page 114, which is at the foot of the page. You introduce your figure 16.1 by telling us that the following figures line shows the open balance of PPs, i.e. pinnacles and peaks by day. Can you just explain in broad terms what the table is then?
So an open balance. So just to go through the life of one peak or pinnacle.
Yes.
It's entered in the system. There's an entry date into the system. It's worked on for 1 to many days. At some point, the peak or pinnacle is closed. So what this chart is showing is as peaks and pinnacles are entered and relieved from the system, there's a particular open balance on any particular day. This chart is showing what the open balance was of the peaks or pinnacles on any particular day throughout the period in the chart.
And can we look at the chart and you speak to it?
Certainly. So we can see that the chart starts in the latter part of 1996, and the information as far as new pinnacles and peaks existing for entry into this chart runs through, you can see right there at the end of 2000.
Yes.
So it might be a little difficult to see, but there is a little bit of a different color at the beginning of 2001.
Yeah, so 9th of January 2001, that line there, it's dark.
It's a bit darker.
Green,
so,
yeah.
so for up till the end of 2000, there's the possibility of a new entry into the open balance. By the time we get to the beginning of 2001, I've run out of my source material. But what I wanted to show on this chart was there were still open peaks or pinnacles that were sourced from 1996 through 2000 that still hadn't been resolved. So I'm running the chart out until when all of these peaks and pinnacles are resolved. But the open balance is probably, or is absolutely most pertinent from the end of 96 through the end of 2000 on this chart, where it's just the run out after 2001 begins.
The graph shows a downward trend leading to a minimum number at that time in July 99, and then a very rapid rise. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And you describe in your report that cresting in May 2000.
Yes.
What conclusions overall did you draw from that analysis of the open balance of pinnacles and peaks by day?
Well, the first thing is there seems to be a lot of them. Everything's relative on different systems. What allows a pinnacle or peak to be created, what is, at what level of granularity is it. But having read it, there seems to be a lot of errors being raised regarding the horizon system. So that's just an overall comment about the chart. You will notice that it looks as though, in the middle of August of 99, the balance seems to be dropping. But as we're approaching, or as we're getting to the end of August, all the way, through, looks like, well into the next year, there is a significant increase in the population of open errors in the system that need to be resolved. Now, that could be because that happens to concur with the national rollout period. So just the volume of counters that exist absolutely will have an input to this. But it also indicates to me that there are still significant issues being raised about the efficacy of the horizon system.
You conducted an analysis of the time taken fully to close a pinnacle or peak, and that table is shown over the page, please. Could you explain what figure 16.2 shows?
Yes, so this is trying to represent how long from the inception of a pinnacle or peak to its resolution. It's basically showing its age. What are the age categories of the pinnacles and peaks that were available for me to review. The first bar chart indicates that more than 30,000 of them took from 0 to 20 days to resolve.
Yes.
From opening to closing. The next bar is 20 to 40, and it goes on, from there. But there is, at the end of the chart, there is a box that represents everything that took more than 180 days to resolve. So this is just showing a distribution on how long it took to resolve a particular pinnacle or peak.
And so that last chunk at the end there, more than 6 months to resolve, does that equate to some 3,000 pinnacles and peaks requiring more than 6 months to resolve?
Yes.
Did you form a view or draw any conclusions in relation to this analysis?
It appears to me that these take a long time to resolve. The amount of, basically the aging of these pinnacles and peaks seems to be very long, in my opinion, on how to resolve them. Of course, everyone is unique. There could be a particular issue that is outside of their control that they didn't feel comfortable in actually officially closing a pinnacle or peak down. That's fine for one or two. But what I'm getting from this chart is that it takes a lot of time to actually close these down. So that doesn't, it's not a good look.
You also, I think, analysed those people, I think all within ICL, who were involved in resolving 1,000 peaks or pinnacles or more. And there was a list of 48 of them, I think, And this is a sort of a league table, is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And just for information, Barbara Longley, the first amongst them, employee of ICL Pathway. Is that
Yes, that's my understanding, yes.
right? Can we turn to section 17 of the report, please?
Mr. Beer, before we do that, can I just go back to the table at 16.1, just either to confirm what's in my head or for Mr. Cipione to dispel it? He looked at the opening of PPs up until the end of 2000. And so I've taken from that, Mr. Cipione, that if we look at the chart, which is more or less opposite the 9th of January 2001, those are the open peaks at that point. And it actually takes until, well, between September and December 2002, which is getting close to 2 years for some of them to be resolved. Have I got that right?
You have that right, sir.
Fine, thank you. Yeah.
Can we turn to section 17 of your report, please, on page 118? Again, the topic disclosed by the heading, acceptance incidents, AIs, were a gating issue to the financial success of ICL Pathway, a persisting issue related to AI 376. Again, to introduce this topic, can you explain what you're addressing in this section of your report, please?
Yes, so my understanding from reading the material was that the acceptance was a term that POCL and ICL Pathway used to confirm that the system was good enough to be put into practice. It was good enough to be deployed. And more specifically, it actually triggered, I believe, the first payment to ICL Pathway for constructing the system and for implementing the system.
You tell us in 17.1.2 that acceptance was financially significant to ICL Pathway because ICL Pathway was paid once acceptance was achieved, and it received a high degree of attention by ICL Pathway. The it there, are you referring to acceptance or the financial significance attributed to acceptance?
Acceptance. I'm referring to acceptance.
You tell us that the monthly reports describe outstanding or existing AIs and ICL Pathway's efforts to resolve them, and 376 caught your attention. It concerned accounting integrity. Why did AI 376 catch your attention?
The Horizon system, while it is not the actual official financial accounting system for the post office, it is the source of all information for the financial, for the accounting for the post office. If there are any issues with accounting integrity that are sourcing from the Horizon system, that seems like, I mean, that's the purpose, that's one of the main purposes of the Horizon system, is to make sure that it is providing accounting data with integrity to the post office. So when I saw that, that caught my attention, that was a term associated with AI 376.
And you point out that 376 was one of the final AIs to be closed.
That is correct.
In terms of the chronology, you tell us that 24th of September 1999 marked the day that acceptance was granted, triggering a payment, an invoice for payment of £68 million to be paid within 30 days. And then in November 99, at least one full month and possibly 2 full months after acceptance, ICL reported that, quote, POCL have come round to the understanding that dealing with residual AI 376 concerns in the short to medium term will rely on processes and tools, but no new software features as such. Why did that catch your attention?
I keep going back to, the integrity of the accounting data that is being sourced from the Horizon system. That's an extremely fundamental concept, and that is probably the most important item the most important feature that the Horizon system should deliver. The fact that this is still an issue troubles me when I read about it.
Why does it trouble you?
Because if that data doesn't have integrity, the system is not performing its proper function.
In 17.1.7, if we scroll down, please, you record that in February 2000, ICL Pathway declared that the POCL acceptance manager had left the project and transferred the residual actions to business as usual, and it was unclear to you exactly what took place to close AI 376. You say the reading of these entries leaves too much, or leaves much room for interpretation. What did you mean by that, please?
I was not clear from the materials that were provided to me exactly how this acceptance issue was closed. I know it's a big deal. I keep reading about it. It's a big deal. And then it's closed without a lot of commentary on exactly was the system fixed? Is it perfect now? I did not derive anything from the material I was reading as to what happened to actually allow that particular acceptance incident to be closed.
You've just asked yourself a question there, or posed a question, is it perfect now? Is that what you would have required for accounting integrity?
I certainly would have required that. I thought it was perfect. I mean, there's no perfect system. There's always the opportunity to introduce errors in any computer system. So perfect is not an achievable goal for any system. However, you should think that it's pretty perfect. You should think that there's no reason that is out there that you will be introducing errors into your financial system based off of how the technology is working.
You then set out in 79.1, you say, regardless, the fact that accounting integrity was a persistent issue in the national rollout of Horizon cannot have been the intention of the sponsors nor the goal of ICL Pathway. That might be stating the obvious. It's plainly not a goal.
Of course not. I'm positive that ICL Pathway did not have that as their intention. I'm positive that that the post office, as the sponsor of the system, was not expecting that. And perhaps I wasted a few lines by writing that, but I just wanted to confirm that I don't think that this was an intended feature of the system to have problems with the accounting integrity.
But your focus has been instead on what was done to resolve it.
Yes.
And is the state of your conclusion that you're unsure exactly what was done to resolve the issue on AI 376?
From this report, from the materials I was provided for this report, I could not figure out what was actually done to close that incident.
Have you read or heard evidence since then which goes to that issue?
Yes.
What was done? What's your understanding of what was done?
My understanding of what was done was that the benchmark for closing it continued to change throughout this period. There were a lot of tools and techniques and mechanisms that were required to be wrapped around the Horizon system to check for errors that the Horizon system might have been passing along through its processing. So I guess when I read about that, let me explain. you have the source of information, which is Horizon, which is supposed to be creating the accounting information that's fed into the financial systems. We know through the pinnacles and through this AI 376 that that was not operating correctly, at least during this period. So one option, which I think would have been the best option, was to go and make sure that the actual Horizon system was transacting correctly, was processing the data correctly so that it had high integrity. What I understand from reading from the materials that I have been provided with subsequent to writing my report is that there was a lot of difficulty in figuring out exactly what was introducing these errors in the Horizon system. So as a plan B, there were a lot of processes and procedures and tools that were trying to ring fence the Horizon systems, which was known to be generating information that did not have the highest level of integrity, to try to catch those errors before it hit the post office's financial systems.
And what was your view as to the introduction of a tool or tools that sought to recognise that there was a lack of financial integrity or accounting integrity?
Having a safety net around any financial system is fine. It's always a good practice. However, if you know that the source of information that's creating the errors is your own system, that being ICL, I think that's where the effort should have, there should have been a lot of effort in making sure that that was rock solid, that there was, everything was being done to make sure that that system functioned exactly the way it needed to function. Because that's one of the basic features of this system. It's a very important feature for any financial system. You have to have integrity with the data, and I think from the materials I've read, it sounds like they were going away, at least during this period, going away from that particular effort to trying to just make sure that they knew errors were being generated. Let's have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D to try to make sure that if an error existed, that it was caught before it actually got into the post office's financial records.
So rather than putting effort into, or all effort into, identifying root causes, you're focusing on catching the consequences.
Yes.
As a process, what's your view of that?
I think that having those type of controls is always a good practice, provided that you're really trying to make sure that the genesis of the information is correct, it has efficacy to it. If you're relying on your safety nets to protect you, I would suggest that's poor practice. You need to be, sorry, if that's one of your main reliances, that's poor practice. You should always rely on your safety nets. Safety nets are there for a reason. It's always a good thing to have a safety net or guardrails, or even a couple layers of safety nets or guardrails. But if you are, and from the materials I read, it sounds like this was still an issue, that this was an issue with the Horizon system. If you continue to allow those safety nets to cover functionality that should be present in the core system, I think that's a terrible practice, rather than correcting the core system in a way that you know will persist.
Did you form a view whether the issues relating to AI 376 were sufficiently serious to be bound up in whether the system should have been accepted or not?
Accounting integrity, absolutely. That I'd say that's probably the number one thing for this system is the accounting integrity.
and therefore, what was your view as to whether or not the issues with AI 376 were, on the face of it, sufficiently serious as to affect acceptance?
It absolutely should have affected acceptance.
Can we turn, please, to page 129 of your report? This is skipping over extracts from monthly reports concerning AI 376 in particular. And at the foot of the page, you say you surveyed the pinnacles and peaks for the pattern of acceptance incident followed by numeric, or AI followed by numeric, to identify pinnacles or peaks that dealt with acceptance incident issues. The following figure shows that 358 pinnacles and peaks were related to acceptance incidents, and 223 pinnacles and peaks were specifically associated with AI 376. And if we go over the page, please. I think the lighter colour green relates to AI 376. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
It's slightly difficult to tell. Does that show that they persisted into after June 2000?
I also am having a hard time seeing the colors. But it looks like they are gone. It looks like the last entry for those are July of 2000.
Thank you. Is there anything else you wish to say about acceptance incidents, and in particular AI 376?
That's the accounting integrity of the Horizon system, I think, is the most important part of the Horizon system. It is the reason for the, beyond any just the operational efficiency of the branches being worked. Sure, that's important, but no one would ask for a point of sale system that they knew were connected to your financials if there was any doubt about the integrity of the accounting information that was being derived from it.
Can we turn to section 18 of your report, please? Thank you. With the heading, payment and receipt imbalances were common symptoms with varied causes. You say that what you've previously discussed directed you to identify examples of accounting issues within the pinnacles and peaks. And in this part of your report, you explore selected examples of accounting issues as represented by payment and receipt imbalance issues. So just describe to us why you're focusing on this, please.
I thought it was important to try to, number one, support the last, the prior theme that we just discussed. But I also thought it was important to illustrate how these issues were manifesting themselves. And I think as we get to talk through the examples that I put in, it's going to show that it wasn't as though there was a particular section of the Horizon system that was causing integrity issues as far as like the development code was concerned. The causes were all over the place, in my opinion, as to what created these payment and receipt imbalances. And I thought it was important to just show that there were a variety of reasons that would illustrate how things could be out of balance.
You remind us in 18.1.2 of the cash accounting period 14 to 15 and then into 16 example that you gave earlier in your report, which was, I think, an example showing how it should work.
Yes.
And you've updated that to show what happens when you introduce a bug into the system, which causes the brought forward balance to be incorrectly calculated. So if we just scroll down, please, and look at Fig 18.1. Thank you. Can you talk us through it, please?
Certainly. So what I'm showing here is that if the horizon system was to inaccurately calculate the opening balance for cash and stock, in this example, just multiplying those values by 3, as this particular receipts and payments account was reported out, it would show an imbalance between the receipts and the payments. So in this instance, there's an approximately $11,000 or 11,000 pound difference or discrepancy on this particular report. So this is just an illustration. This is something that I thought would be helpful for the chair, just as an example.
And so this shows an imbalance of £11,000 where payments are greater than receipts.
Receipts would be greater than payments, I believe. Maybe I wrote that wrong.
I was going from over the page, 18.1.4.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yes.
Let's just go back to the table and check.
So I think that I might have switched receipts and payments here.
Okay, so-
But there's an imbalance. The important part is there's an imbalance here.
And so this would show as a surplus of £11,000.
Yes.
To what extent could you ascertain whether the information that's shown on this page here was visible, assuming this was a real-life example, to a sub-postmaster?
I will say that during the course of my review, this in particular was a little bit difficult to tease out from the information that I had. I did have some technical manuals. I did have some documentation available to me. None of the reports that were available in those manuals as representative of the reports that the branches might see looked as straightforward and clean as this. So I thought it was, just for the concepts, important to put this. I guess this is the way I would have shown it. This is to show the concept, but this certainly is not, I believe, anything close to what the people at the counters would have seen.
If we go over the page, please, and look at 18.1.5, you say there are various other issues that could result in an imbalance. Payments that were not recorded in Horizon, payments that were erroneously recorded in Horizon, receipts not recorded or erroneously recorded in Horizon, carried forward balance incorrect because the cash and or stock were not correctly declared by the sub-postmaster, or there have been cash and stock changes that couldn't be accounted for. You then describe a methodology. Can you explain what you did then, please, in relation to this issue?
Certainly. So in order to come up with the examples that eventually exist in this particular section, we wanted to basically search all of the available peaks and pinnacles. Effectively, what we did was we went through a number of iterations of looking at one or two, trying to manually trying to understand the way they would look, and then start feeding in concepts or words into the brain space technology that I described at the very outset of this hearing.
And are they described in Figure 18.1?
Yes. So for instance, in this, we're looking for, the concept of error, cache, issue, fail, and others. So what we're looking for is, basically what's happening is BrainSpace is taking the entirety of the peaks and the pinnacles and coming up with a bunch of words and phrases that are available for searching on. What this is showing is, what BrainSpace calls a concept, which is exactly how it sounds. It's what does it think, just without being told anything, what concepts could exist within this body of documents. And one of them was error, one of them was issue, one of them was cache, and one of them was fail, that we have in the light blue highlighted here. So that's the start of the process.
And so that gave you your first run of data, namely 38,803 pinnacles or peaks.
Yes.
You explained that only a small number of these were weighted highly relevant to each of the displayed concepts. Just explain what you mean by that.
Right. So within these concepts, so as the BrainSpace technology runs and includes different numbers of documents underneath each of these concepts, it has a grading for how closely aligned to the concept is this pinnacle or peak, and how weakly aligned is it. And what I'm saying here is that although we have a large population, since this is kind of the outset of the process, as expected, not a high percentage of any one of the populations for each one of these concepts was considered very tightly aligned to that concept. So we needed to go on to another step.
And you explain that in 18.1.8. A review of those at the top of the distribution revealed an issue mentioned in several pinnacles and peaks, namely cache or stock not balancing. The common phrase being used was receipts versus payments. So did you use that concept for a new search?
Yes.
And then if we go over the page, please. What was the result of that new focus search?
So that provided a very focused set of documents. I believe it was 67 documents that was the result of the population underneath the receipts versus payments concept.
Can you explain what 18.1.9 means, please?
Okay, so this was this was just another phrase, and it looks to be a technical term that was also associated here within the search. That happened. It's basically it's something that came up in our to be considered, to be looked at, and it looks as though it was. So it says it's worth noting that entered BBF is commonly found in PPs when pasting in error messages from a manual migration message store. So from my understanding of the readings of the peaks and pinnacles, oftentimes the SSC will try to pull in information from the message stores, and they're also entering that information. They're trying to document the process that they're using to fix it. When they happen to paste in information from the message store, this particular phrase happened to have been included in that information, so it shows up a lot. That's all we're saying.
Got it. So the search returned 67 documents, and you actually read those?
Yes.
You say that a CMML model was created. What does that mean?
I'm going to have to refer back to even refresh my memory of what the actual words are, but essentially what that means is we're going through an iterative process, because this is a machine learning mechanism The first step that we talked about was an unsupervised machine learning process, but every step beyond that is what I'm going to be describing as a supervised machine learning process. What does that mean? That means that we are giving a particular problem to BrainSpace to solve. We are allowing BrainSpace to provide what it thinks the best answer is, and then we're grading that answer and feeding the results back. So when I say grading that answer, for instance, I might say I want to look for a particular concept like error, that was at the beginning of this process, and let's pretend that there was a document population of 100, and BrainSpace came back and said, I think 15 of these documents are related to the concept of error. It's now incumbent upon me as a reviewer to grade BrainSpace. So I might say, of those, what did I say, 11, 15? Of the 15 that BrainSpace thought was an error concept, I will say, I agree with you on 11 of them, and I disagree with you on 4 of them, and feed that back into BrainSpace and let it do the process again. So now it not only has an idea of what I think is an error, it also has an idea of what I think is not an error, and it can then basically incrementally improve its search to align with what I think the concept of an error is, as opposed to what it thinks the concept of error is.
Thank you. You say that 3 additional rounds of training were undertaken, as set out in your table. Just summarize what the additional rounds of training were for.
Right. So the additional rounds of training were the process I was just talking about, except for it was more than once. We kept doing it over, and we kept telling BrainSpace what we wanted. We'd get it back, we would grade it, and we would do it again and get it back, and do it again and get it back until we get to the end process here, which was, I believe, the 386 documents.
And then scroll down, please. I don't think we need to address 1.12 or 1.13, do we?
No, they're just technical descriptions.
And therefore, if we come to your analysis, which is divided between quantitative and qualitative, starting with the former, can you explain what you're describing in 18.1.4, please?
Certainly. So the result of the prior process was that we had identified 399 PPs, 137 were selected for review, and 127 as relevant. So,
Yes.
so that just sets the baseline.
Relevant to the concept, the idea of
Yes.
a payment and receipt imbalance.
Exactly. So for that population, the first thing we wanted to do was just quantitatively describe those those pinnacles and peaks across 2 of the data elements that are associated with those. One is the response category, and one is the defect cause. And I think we've discussed those already today, but I'd be happy to discuss them again if you would.
Yes, if you would, just by reference, starting with response category to the table at 18.1.6, please.
Right. So as a pinnacle or peak is processed, they start tracking what's happening with this. We're going to identify, we're going to put different values in what's called the response category, which is basically how each individual that's reviewing the peak or pinnacle is describing it. That this is the category. This is me as a review. This is my response to the categorization of what I think this particular the stage of this particular peak or pinnacle is. So that's one dimension. The defect cause, that's a little bit more straightforward. That's as I said before, that can change throughout the process, but ultimately there is a final value associated with the defect cause, which is supposed to represent what the SSC thought the actual defect was for this particular peak or pinnacle.
And in terms of the response category, I think you concluded that 19% of the closure reasons, those which are described as other in figure 18.3 and administrative response in 18.3, didn't provide much or any insight into the investigation process. Is that right?
That is correct.
And just explain what the significance of that is.
So there, there are, these data elements should provide a little bit of information about exactly how these peaks and pinnacles were resolved, what the response was. When I see something like administrative, it almost sounds like an other or a catch-all. It's just not very informative to me as to what the issue is. So, so for instance, in the chart in figure 18.3, one of them is no fault in product. That tells me a lot more than administrative response. At least I understand what the point of view was from the SSC on that particular peak or pinnacle.
Thank you. Over the page, please. And scroll down. Second element of the analysis of defect cause. And I think from this, you found that a significant proportion of these pinnacles and peaks had defect causes that were recognized by ICL Pathway as being related to the design or development of Horizon. That's 45%. On the pie chart, is that, you tell us which elements take you to the 45%.
Certainly, and it's in the footnote. So it's if the defect cause is design, design dash high level design,
Yes.
development dash code, development dash low level design, development dash reference data.
That takes you to your 45.
Yes.
And you say in the narrative, this indicates to you that there were acknowledged bugs, errors, or defects in Horizon that were capable of giving rise to a payment and receipt imbalance.
Yes.
Why did that indicate that to you?
Because the corrective, because the cause identified by the SSC was it was a development or a design aspect of Horizon.
So it's self-describing.
Yes.
And what's the consequence of that? What's the significance of that?
The significance is that this was an error in the Horizon system. That's what was causing these imbalances.
But also an error in the Horizon system giving rise to, or capable of giving rise to, a receipt or payment imbalance.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So these are all receipt and payment issues that we're talking about now. So everything that we're going to discuss in this section has to do with that concept.
You turned to analyze the time that it took to resolve pinnacles and peaks in this category. We can turn over the page to 18.5. And you tell us in the text underneath that only 26 or 20% of them were fully closed within a week. 43% took 5 weeks or more fully to close, and 37, i.e. 29%, took 9 weeks or more fully to close.
Yes.
What, if any, conclusion or observation did you make on that material?
Well, the best case scenario on this, let's talk about the 9 weeks or more. Let's talk about the errors or defects that relate to those 37. The best case is that after the initial error was identified and entered into the peak or pinnacle system, there was another 9 weeks where that error could have been manifesting itself throughout the system. That's the best case scenario. Unless something outside of this process was occurring that mitigated that issue.
Can we turn over the page, please, to your qualitative observations? You say in 18.2.2 that it's useful to examine individual pinnacles and peaks. You've selected 7 that highlight the varied causes of payment and receipt imbalances. How did you select them?
I picked them from the population that we were just discussing. So I picked them for purposes to illustrate the various possible causes of this particular symptom.
So to give a fair cross-section of illustrative causes.
Yes.
You summarize the, at a high level, the pinnacle or peak. You took some excerpts from the peak or pinnacle, and then you gave observations. We can see that in practice. If we go over the page, please, and look at the first of the 7 examples. Summary at the top, then the chronology, and this isn't all of what's in the, in this case, pinnacle. We've seen that some of them are very long indeed, running to many, many pages.
Yes.
But you've taken out the important parts of the chronology, is that right?
Yes.
And then over the page, please, my observations. If you scroll down, please. You've asked a series of 6 questions, which I think are the same, repeating through the 7 examples. And we can see what those questions are. Yeah, so that was the way that you were structuring your examination of the 7 examples.
Yes.
If we go back to page 137, please. You say in 18.2.4, thank you, you make the following general observations. Can you talk us through those 5 observations, please?
Certainly. So many of these peaks and pinnacles seem to have been raised as a result of internal reconciliation. So that would have been what I was describing before, perhaps, one of those safety nets that exists to detect errors. So these pinnacles or peaks weren't necessarily raised by a SPM calling up and saying, I have a problem. They were more raised by the detective controls that had perhaps ring-fenced the Horizon system.
Thank you. Second observation.
So, and I think I said this in one of my prior themes, reading these, I think that the team that's trying to resolve these is earnest in their effort to trying to fix these problems, at least as they saw the symptoms. So I did not see any indication that they weren't trying to solve them or trying to not do their job, and I think that's important for the chair to know.
Third observation.
Each one of the peaks and pinnacles had a lot of different teams that were involved. So oftentimes there would be, so there's different development teams that are being, so there's the SSC and then there's, different development teams within the Horizon group that are working together to try to solve it. So the SSC could try to solve something by themselves, but they might need to reach out to someone on the EPOS development team or on the APS development team or on the LFS development team, depending on what time period you were in. So this is just describing that there was a lot of conversation and back and forth between people in the various groups.
And then your fourth observation, you've told us about the earnest effort to investigate issues, identify a root cause, and mitigate future recurrences. How successful was the earnest effort?
I think that the effort, the earnest effort that I was talking about fixed something. It fixed something. But there's, perhaps we can kind of step away from this particular example, but just talk about what causes errors and at what level do you remediate errors? There are symptoms and there are probably lots of different levels of causes of those symptoms. The higher, the further up the food chain you can get to the cause, the more likely it is you're going to eliminate future recurrences of those particular symptoms. What I'm describing here is, I know that something was fixed for sure. I know that perhaps there was a correction entered into the system. So for instance, there was a receipt imbalance in payment, receipt and payment imbalance. Someone understands what that is and understands that at the post office that needs to be corrected. So perhaps one fix would be, I'm going to correct this particular instance of this symptom. That would probably be really just attacking the symptom. Sometimes it might be, well, I know that there was a reference data issue related to this, and I know that there was one specific part of the reference data system that was at fault here. So I'm going to go correct that and also provide a correcting accounting entry to the post office. But what if I know that the management of that reference data is really the root cause of that reference data issue existing to begin with? There might be another level that we need to go to fix that, and there might be another level about that. So what I'm trying to describe here is these were all addressed in an earnest way to actually resolve these particular peaks and pinnacles. I'm not clear on whether the appropriate activity to get at the ultimate genesis of all these problems was really ever addressed across the spectrum of all these, because the SSC has got a lot of work to do. We discussed that already in one of my themes. Their job is to fix this issue, and they did a good job on that. What I'm not clear on is whether the true cause that's creating all of these error instances is being addressed or not. And it's just not apparent to me in each one of these very specific errors that are being addressed.
And that's why you say it's not evident that the identified issue was resolved.
Yes.
So the symptom might have been cured,
Yes.
or the next proximate cause to the symptom might have been addressed,
Yes.
but it was not, there wasn't evidence that any root causes were addressed.
Well, I guess that really depends on what we define as the root cause. So we can have 1 degree of separation of root cause, 2 degrees. I mean, if we know that just 1 degree of separation actually is truly the root cause, there could have been things that were absolutely addressed. But I'm just not sure of what the degree of separation is here, because I'm only looking at the pinnacle and peak information. I don't know anything more about the system for sure.
Your fifth conclusion, in a majority of these pinnacle and peaks, the root cause is related to horizon. What do you mean by that? Because the riposte to that might be, well, of course it's related to horizon. What are the other alternatives?
Well, the first example we're going to get to is not a horizon generated issue. So that one doesn't have anything to do with horizon. The rest of them do.
Okay. And what's the significance of that?
The significance of that is these are not environmental factors that are causing these imbalance issues. It's horizon.
It's the system.
Yes.
Can we turn then to the first example, please, on page 138 and 139, if we could display those together, please. It may be that we won't be able to display them together, or all of them together, and therefore, at least in a readable way. we'll do them page by page. Thank you. Can you talk us through this first example, please, concerning eco migration?
Certainly. So if it's all right with you, Mr. Beer, I'm probably just going to read it verbatim and then each line and then
give an explanation.
Yes. All right. So the first line is the system call related to tip 1052. Please route this call to John Moran in EDSC, and I believe EDSC is another term for the SSC. I think that's correct. I'm not positive that's correct. But what this is indicating to me is related to tip 1052. So I know that tip is the post office's accumulator of all the transactions for its accounting. That's where Horizon is delivering its transactions to at the post office. So this would be an example of since it's coming from TIP, this indicates to me that this is not coming from Postmaster. This is coming from somewhere downstream saying that there's a problem. Okay?
Yes.
All right. So MSU, John Moran, the following has been copied from business call, and I'll skip that incident. Discrepancy in cash account for week 46. A comparison between values received within the cash account files and those derived from the transaction stream. Identified the following differences. So it's showing differences. So what this is saying is it looks like the cash account is showing different numbers than what the transactions that have already arrived in TIP are. So I'm imagining that there is a balancing that's being done at the branch. It's being sent up to the post office. The post office already has, in theory, all the transactions, and they're comparing what they think that should look like to what the branch is sending it, and there's a discrepancy.
There's a shortfall of £97.37.
Yes.
39 rather.
Yes.
Yep.
So now we're asking the SSC to investigate. So that gets us to the next line. All right. And so we see some color commentary here. This is an illustration of the stupidities at the that Echo software allows. So just to refresh everyone's memory, Echo was a point of sale system that I believe existed in some branches prior to the Horizon system. So that's why this is an example of an issue that is not really a Horizon issue, okay? A clerk can transfer cash and checks between stock units without bothering to make sure that they match up. The result shows up when the transaction data is migrated to Horizon, which insists on clear demarcation between cash and check. In this case, the critical transactions are transfers in of two checks whose total amount exactly equals the discrepancy noted. So what this is indicating to me is that Echo allowed someone to call, let's see, it's total amount, two checks. Echo is allowing cash to be called a check. So that's where they're out of balance. The post office is thinking I should have some cash and checks, and Horizon is getting it. This is probably an initial load of data into this is probably an initial month at this particular branch. And when they migrated the data from Echo to Horizon, Echo incorrectly put everything into checks instead of dividing it between cash and checks. So that's what the issue, that's the source of this particular issue. And then it goes on to say, I think Steve Warwick is aware of the Echo problem here, but as a matter of course, I will route the call to him to allow him to comment. Steve Warwick says this issue is well documented in previous incidents with TIP. The effect is that Pathway system reports the values of the affected products incorrectly on the cash account for the migration cap, although the cash account still balances. TIP then uses the cache account figures from the migration cap as the start point for validating the next cache account received from the outlet, and report a discrepancy between the transactions received in week 2 and cache account for week 2. This is it says this is a user error pre-migration of Echo plus Office. This is not a Horizon issue. This is not a Horizon generated issue. This is This is an issue that they've seen before when they're migrating from the Echo system to the Horizon system. So then they do their passing back to MSU for issue of red. I think that's a reconciliation database. I can't recall exactly what RED stands for, but my understanding is that's kind of a documentation method that the SSC uses to, or Horizon ICL Pathway uses to show the post office that everything's all right. And they issued it to the customer, no data error, close the call, and then they closed the call.
And then your observations, please.
If I assume that the issuing of a red notice to the customer resolved the peak or pinnacle, then yes. So, and that's my assumption, but I just wanted to note that the resolution was that they documented it and sent it on to.
So the immediate issue was fixed?
Yes, exactly.
On that assumption?
Yes.
Was a defect or root cause identified?
Yes, this was a migration. This was an Echo generated issue, and it was identified.
And was that correctly recorded? Was that defect or root cause correctly recorded in the Pinnacle?
I said yes on this. I think that they indicated in the text here that this was because the user made that transfer, so I think that this is an appropriate identification.
Next question, evidence that the defect or root cause was addressed, and I think you say you wouldn't expect it to be addressed.
I don't.
And then more general observations, can you help us with those?
Right, so what I wanted to bring up here is that this was generated through an internal reconciliation, which is fine, and this would have been one of the reasons why having that ring fence around the system is good. This wasn't an issue really that was generated from within Horizon, but it was an issue to make sure that the integrity of the data was right, and that particular safety net worked correctly and appropriately in this case.
And no response to an SPM was required, so he or she wouldn't know about this.
That's right. This wasn't raised by an SPM, therefore there was no need to call an SPM about this.
And so the changes in the, in inverted commas, the SPM's data would be known without the SPM realizing that there was a discrepancy, or the cause of the discrepancy, or the correction of the discrepancy.
That's right. They would have been blissfully ignorant of this in an appropriate way.
Yes. And then lastly, observations on the defect root cause. You say that general user defect cause was correct.
Yes.
So that might be an appropriate moment to take the break before we move to example 2 of 7, because that will take a little while.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So might we say 5 to 2?
Yeah, fine.
Thank you very much, sir.